It's pretty wild to think about the incredible chemical balancing act that's happening inside your body at this very second. It's this constant invisible fight to keep everything in perfect harmony. And trust me, when that balance gets thrown off, things can get dramatic fast.
I mean, have you ever wondered about that? Why does something that feels like it's all in your head, like a panic attack, create such a powerful physical reaction? Or why do some medical conditions leave people feeling weak or confused?
Well, the answer, believe it or not, is hidden in the chemistry of your blood. It's this incredibly delicate balance that, when it's tipped even a little bit, can affect everything from your breathing to how your brain works. So let's dive in and investigate this amazing internal balancing act.
Okay, so to really get a handle on this, we first have to talk about one key measurement, pH. Now, you probably remember pH from high school chemistry, right? Well, in our blood, it's all about measuring acidity. Your body works around the clock to keep that number in this super tight, happy little range, right around 7.4. If that number dips down and your blood gets too acidic, we call that acidosis. And if it climbs too high, becoming too basic or alkaline, that's alkalosis. As you're about to see, either one of these can really mess things up.
So, who's in charge of keeping this perfect balance? Well, let's meet the two lead detectives on the case, your lungs and your kidneys. Think of these two as a tag team. Your lungs are the fast responders, the ones who kick down the door. They control carbon dioxide, or CO2, which acts like an acid in the body. By just changing how fast or slow you breathe, they can tweak CO2 levels in a matter of minutes. Then you've got the kidneys. They're the slow, steady partners, the ones doing the careful detective work. They manage a base called bicarbonate, and they make adjustments over hours or even days. So you've got two different systems, both working together to solve the exact same problem.
All right, let's crack open our first case file. What happens when the blood gets too acidic? We're diving into an investigation of acidosis.
This here is our roadmap, showing us exactly how doctors follow the clues. And for this first case, acidosis, our first big lead is a blood pH that's dropped below 7.35. Once we know that, the next question is pretty simple. Who's the culprit here, the lungs or the kidneys?
Let's put the lungs under the microscope first. If they're the ones causing the problem, we're looking at a case of respiratory acidosis.
The problem here has a fancy name, hypoventilation, but it basically means you're just not breathing effectively. You're not getting rid of enough of that acidic CO2, so it starts to build up in your blood. So, what would cause something like that? Well, it could be a physical airway blockage, like what happens in a bad asthma attack or it's COPD. Or it could be that the brain's command center for breathing has been suppressed, which is a really dangerous side effect of an opioid overdose.
But what if the lungs are doing their job just fine? Well, then our investigation pivots. We start looking at the kidneys and the body's overall metabolism. And that's metabolic acidosis.
With metabolic acidosis, it really boils down to two main possibilities. Either your body is creating way too much acid, or it's losing way too much of its base, bicarbonate. To figure out which it is, doctors use this really clever diagnostic tool called the anion gap. You can think of it like a piece of forensic evidence that points them directly to the real culprit.
So if the anion gap comes back high, that's our big clue. It's a flashing red light telling doctors that the body is producing some kind of extra acid. The textbook example of this is diabetic ketoacidosis, or DKA. When diabetes is out of control, the body can't use sugar for energy, so it panics and starts burning fat instead. The problem is, this process creates these acidic byproducts called ketones, which then just flood the system.
Okay, but what if that anion gap test comes back normal? Well, that points us to the other scenario. The body isn't making too much acid, it's losing its base. And the most straightforward, common example of this is just severe diarrhea. Your lower GI tract is packed with bicarbonate, and when you lose a lot of fluid that way, you are literally flushing that essential base right out of your system.
Okay, so we've looked at what happens when things get too sour. Now let's open up our second case file and see what happens when the scales tip in the complete opposite direction. Let's investigate alkalosis.
And we're back to our roadmap. For our second investigation, alkalosis, the initial clue is a blood pH that has climbed above 7.45. And you guessed it, our question is exactly the same. Is this a job for the lungs or for the kidneys?
Let's check out the lungs first. When they are the cause of alkalosis, it's a case of what we call respiratory alkalosis.
And this brings us right back to our very first question. The problem here is hyperventilation.
breathing way too fast and too deep. When you do that, you're blowing off too much CO2, basically getting rid of acid faster than your body can make it. This makes your blood more basic or alkaline. And what's the classic trigger? An anxiety or panic attack. That dizzy, lightheaded feeling is a direct result of this sudden shift in your blood chemistry.
All right, so for our final case file, if the lungs are in the clear, the problem must be with the body's metabolism. This is metabolic alkalosis.
So with this one, the fundamental issue is that the body is losing too much acid, which of course leaves behind an excess of base. So how does this happen? Well, the most common culprits are vomiting, where you're losing a ton of powerful stomach acid, or taking too many of certain kinds of diuretics, which can trick the kidneys into getting rid of too much acid.
So we've now investigated the 4 main ways your body's pH can go haywire. But how does it fix itself? How do we close the case and get that balance back to normal?
This is where our detective duo, the lungs and kidneys, really shine. Your body has this brilliant backup plan called compensation. If one system messes up, the other one jumps in to pick up the slack. So for example, if you have metabolic acidosis, your lungs kick into high gear, and you start breathing faster to blow off that extra CO2. And if you have respiratory acidosis, your kidneys work overtime to hold on to as much bicarbonate base as they can. It's just a beautiful system of teamwork.
But at the end of the day, in medicine, the goal isn't just to chase a pH number on a lab report. It's about finding and fixing the root cause. You don't just treat the acidosis, you give insulin for the DKA that's causing it. You don't just treat the alkalosis, you give IV fluids to the person who's been vomiting. You solve the original problem, and that delicate balance starts to restore itself.
So this silent, relentless balancing act is happening inside every single one of us right now, influencing everything from how your muscles fire to how clearly you can think. It really makes you stop and wonder, what other incredible, invisible processes is your body quietly managing, second by second, just to keep the whole show on the road?